Hello and welcome to this week's one take, unrehearsed, unedited, frank talk discussion with a business leader regarding how she's dealing with the most pressing issues of the day. These interviews are brought to you by the executive consulting firm Platinum Group. Today I'm talking with Claire Ferrara, president and majority owner of Standard Heating and Air, a 91-year-old fourth generation family-owned business based in Minneapolis. Claire, welcome to One Take.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I am too, because your company was triple whammied last year when I think about it. With COVID-19, you had to keep your employees safe in your workplace. You had to keep them safe when they were out in the field. And then you had to also keep your customers feeling like they were safe when your folks would come into their homes. So just walk us through, how did you deal with this? Especially, we are now 1 year. It's a 1 year away from when all this started to hit with your company. How did you deal with it 1 year ago in March as all this started to happen?
Yeah, that's the big question. Actually, this week I was talking with some employees about how it was a year ago this week. We had our first conversations about a COVID-19 protocol. And, we did not expect that a year later we'd still be talking about this. So, it was something that happened pretty quickly back last March. Things changed on a day-by-day basis, really. And it was a core group of us as a leadership team that came together and said, okay, we have to think through every possible interaction our people have here at the business to the time we get into someone's home, and what are all the touch points so that we could put protocols, procedures, PPE in place. And then I had a great marketing person who hopped on, got messaging out to customers, got a website updated. But I would say that, that took us we did it within a couple of days. And we didn't sleep maybe for a couple of days, but after that, our employees were really great. They gave us feedback, what's working, what's not working. Customers gave us feedback, and really it was a group effort. But we certainly had challenges, like much of the country, getting protective gear, getting cleaning supplies. So even that was group effort, right? Bring things in from home if you need to. We got orders upon orders upon orders coming in. It was really sourcing everything we could from everywhere. But it took multiple people,
Yeah.
A course of 2-3 days to solidly put that together.
How did you know where to even start? Did you even know what PPE meant, a year and a month ago?
Yeah, luckily, yes, because
Okay.
we're in an industry, right, with safety standards. I have people doing things in the field, and I need them to go home with all their fingers and toes and faculties every day. But we don't have to wear masks every day in our industry. We don't always have to wear like latex gloves, that kind of thing. Certainly the amount of sanitizer for everything was a whole new level. I think for us, the bigger part was the customer interaction or the employee to employee interaction, and figuring out what does that need to look like, because we're in the heating and air conditioning business, but we're really in the people business. And it's very much about a person-to-person interaction.
How did you keep your employees willing to go out there? Because other companies, they could put plexiglass shields up and you could have the 6 feet of separation and everything. But here you're going into people's homes, and were people afraid that the virus had gotten into the air ducts, and if they went into these homes and it was there, they would get it? How did you deal with all that?
Yeah, there was a lot of uncertainty at first. And I think one thing that's gotten us through actually a whole year was the level of transparency and the constant communication we had. I made a decision right up front to be very frank with all of our employees and say, here's what I know, here's what I don't know, and here are the sources I'm getting my information from. And what we did is we convened employees from every department and said, okay, how do we make this work? What's going to make you feel safe? So that was the first step. In making people feel heard. They're part of the process, so they got say as to what would make them feel safe. And then the other part was they knew I had their back. I made it very clear up front, if anyone is ever uncomfortable or feels unsafe, just like they would outside a pandemic, but now that there's a pandemic, if anyone feels unsafe, you do not have to go into a home or do whatever the task is in front of you. Call us, we'll talk through it, we'll figure it out. In terms of COVID spreading, we knew what was being put out on the CDC and World Health Organization websites. And so we took that information and used that as best as we could.
Did you have misinformation, and did you have people kind of say, no, what you're looking at is fake news or false information? How did you deal with some of those situations?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of that with the rise of social media, right? And everyone's got access
Right.
to Google. It is something we had to work with, but I'll tell you right from the beginning, our leadership team, we made that decision too. We were only going to use very specific sources for information, and we made it clear that that's what we would talk about. So we were referring to Minnesota Department of Health, CDC, World Health Organization, and we weren't going to entertain a bunch of other information. And our employees came along with us. People gave me feedback that they appreciated that we were consistent in what we were using, and those sources, were considered credible. So that's what we stuck with.
Did you think that demand would drop for your services? I know other folks we've talked with kind of figured, oh, gee, going into March as COVID started to hit and as the great toilet paper run occurred and all these other things started to happen, people were like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to have any business, come April, May, June. Were you thinking that way, or did you think you'd keep, things would keep going okay?
I would say it depended on the moment. I had kind of dueling thoughts in my head. Certainly, I did expect that people would be highly concerned about having another person in their home. I think that was going to be pretty apparent right from the get-go. So for me, it was just a matter of how long. I had some confidence that the customer would come back to us eventually. I really just didn't know when. And I will tell you, the customer did go away for a little while. If you had asked me the first couple of weeks of April, I would have said, gosh, by the end of the year, my business needs to be half the size it is today. But luckily, the customer actually did come back to us. I would say end of April, people started to think about like, wow, I'm in my home a lot and, distance learning and all those kinds of things. And so we started to get more phone calls again, end of April. By mid-May, people were thinking about their air conditioner because again, they were going, we're going to be in our homes more than we thought. We got to get this thing figured out. So I'm fortunate, and I know our company feels fortunate that that's the business that we're in. We're a necessity.
Yeah. A lot of the people I've talked with, friends and also professionally, they've either been doing home remodeling or they've been doing home repairs, and they've all been saying, gee, it takes forever. It takes forever to get these things, or they don't have the supplies or the parts. Did you face a supply challenge as well with regards to, having the things you needed to help people?
Yeah, yes, we did. I will say early on, I was able to lean on my father and my uncle, who are, a resource for me, and talk to them about things they've experienced in the past. They haven't had a pandemic, but challenges. And we made the decision to buy as much equipment and parts and pieces as we could. That was knowledge that they had. Hey, in the past, oh my gosh, crisis happens in the world, suppliers get nervous, things change in manufacturing. So we were fortunate. We put in some very large orders early on in our season, before COVID was even quite a pandemic status. And so we actually had a decent amount of supply on hand. But I will tell you that with the level of demand, our supply started to dwindle. And there were times where we were scrambling, calling suppliers to say, hey, do you have this air conditioner? Because we need it next week. And I will say that our suppliers themselves were often a month or 2 months, maybe longer, out on being able to provide restock if it was needed.
As we talk about all this happening last year, it almost sounds like everything went just fine. It went, just smooth as can be.
Oh,
But
no.
what was your greatest challenge through it all? Just the chaos or what?
The greatest challenge. For me personally, I took ownership of this business 1 month before the pandemic was declared. So this was a quick lesson in a different level of leadership. But I would say it was really moving 100 people to where I needed them to go, right? I had 100 people plus thousands of customers who needed to trust that we had a plan, even if that plan was going to change on an almost daily basis at some point. So for me, the biggest challenge was the leadership portion. Now, I personally enjoy that part. People are my job in a really good, positive way. But it was really hard. How do you deal with 100 different personalities, plus customer perception, plus the news or misinformation or changing new information? That was the hardest part for me. We figured out the equipment, we figured out, the PPE, we figured out the processes, but managing the emotions, because it isn't even just what people have to come to work and do. It's their personal lives. They're being secluded from their families, their friends. Maybe they have underlying health conditions, homeschooling, right, that some of them weren't used to. I mean, that level of stress and change in someone's life, you got to suddenly be part counselor, part boss, part friend, part leader, all in one. And that was hard, but it was a great learning opportunity.
So, yeah, really, baptism by fire takes on a whole new definition.
Yeah,
It should be baptism by pandemic.
yep.
But how did you deal with that stress? You know, you talked about how you had to do all those things and everything was going on, and you were constantly probably, I don't know if you even slept, but how did you deal with all that?
I will say I do sleep, but I don't think it feels like I've slept for probably a year. There were a couple of things that I did. One was a strategy I implemented in my business in terms of, getting feedback and having constant communication, checking in with our people, assembling a team of leaders with me who could help make decisions because we had to make quick decisions, right? This wasn't like, okay, what's the 6-month strategy? And so that helped me get through my day, right? The other thing that I did was more about in my personal life. I got a therapist and I engaged some close friends of mine and we started going for walks. As simple as that sounds, every Saturday we would log probably 7 or 8 miles and we continued through the winter, even when it was, 0 degrees. But the purpose that that served for me, both the counseling and this time with my friends outside, for me, it was about not having to show up in any particular way. I could show up without expectation. I just had to show up. And both my circle of friends and my therapist were able to say, okay, where are we today? And let's just be that. Whereas, in my work life, there is an expectation. I have to be there for everyone. And as much as I enjoy that challenge, it was tough this year. So I needed those outlets.
Yep. And as you look now at 2021, how do you see things moving forward with your business, with you as this leader who just went through a lot last year? What's in front of you now as you look at the rest of 2021?
Yeah, so this is a popular conversation, I think, amongst a lot of leaders, right? How do we get out of the COVID cycle where it's all about COVID? Because I will tell you, 2020, every day it was like, who's got COVID, who's exposed to COVID, what customer maybe has COVID, what supplier has a COVID problem. And at some point you have to consciously pull yourself out of that. So the end of 2020, I assembled my leadership team and that's what we came together to talk about was how are we gonna move ourselves forward? For us, we have decided that that looks like back to basics, really, getting organized, reestablishing our foundation, does everybody understand what their role is and how to give feedback and receive feedback? Do we have good core processes? Have we, established our training, going forward, that kind of thing. So that seems so basic, like, don't you have these things? And yes, we did, but we've had a couple years of growth, and then we went through a really tough year where we weren't checking in to see if things were updated or, feedback was happening, but it was all about COVID. Do you feel safe? Are we safe, right? What do you need right now? So for us, it really came back to circling the wagon and, or wagons, I should say. And that's worked really well. People are seeing that there is life outside of COVID, even if it's as simple as, okay, today I'm going to have a meeting with my supervisor and talk about my next stage of development. Or today I'm going to review this core process for our department. So it's kind of this slow, steady get back to the things that are foundational to our business.
So amongst all that and beyond, what do you see as your greatest challenge going forward? What do you see as your greatest challenge either in 2021 or beyond?
I think that if anything, 2020 has hopefully shown some of the world that the trades are a wonderful place to be. There is a certain level of job security there. So the challenge that we experienced pre-pandemic, right, which was labor shortage, still exists today. But I think people are recognizing the value of the industry that I'm in. And so I think that may help us in some ways going forward. But I really think that the greatest challenge is still about the people. And making sure that people feel engaged at work. They don't get stuck in either that COVID cycle or feeling like, they don't have an opportunity to really do something more. I think that's still the same opportunity. And I think anyone who isn't focusing on getting back to that and getting out of the COVID cycle is going to really have some trouble in 2021 and 2022 because, COVID, I think, is going to be with us still for a little while, even with a vaccine.
Yeah. Well, Claire, I asked you a lot of questions. Is there a question I should have asked you that I didn't?
Man, that is a good question. And I think you and I have spoken before, and I feel like there was a question I told you should have asked me, and I don't remember what that was at this time. But one thing I will actually throw out there is, I actually get a lot of people that ask me, well, okay, what are like the 3 top things, that you can do to lead a business through a crisis? And, I will tell you that personally, I don't like that question. I've seen a lot of lists come out about like, here's the 3 to 5 things you got to do and you'll make it. And frankly, it really isn't about a list. And that's something I would tell people, like, it's not about the list of 5 things. You just have to be prepared and have good people around you that can assess what's happening today and what does that mean for tomorrow. And that's really what crisis management is about. Because I got to tell you, a lot of people thought they were prepared, and the pandemic did, totally turn them upside down. So that's just something I would want people to know. You don't need a list. You just need to have good people around you.
Yeah, and I think you also hit on something earlier. You also have to try to figure out how to recharge your own batteries.
That's really important. I would say I personally got caught up in some of that in the beginning, just like, no, here's what needs to happen. Here's the next message. I sat down and called all 100 employees one day just to make sure they knew I was here. And you can only do that for so long. Even with people around me, even with delegating and saying, hey, I need help with this, I still wasn't stopping. And there have been studies done, where people have this surge capacity, right? How long can they be in go mode at max capacity? And I think in some of the studies, it'll tell you it's a couple of months. And so I did hit a wall. I hit a pretty significant wall where I just couldn't think creatively. I had trouble communicating. And that's when I realized I have to be able to look at my team and say, I need to do this tomorrow, and the world's going to have to be okay. Or vocalize what I'm feeling and thinking. And that's really important. You got to communicate with your team about your own needs. Otherwise, you hold the team back and you don't feel very good, and that's not a good outcome.
Well, that sounds great. Thank you for all your time today. We covered a lot of bases, and I really appreciate your joining us. Yeah,
well, thank you for the opportunity. We're not alone in these challenges, and that's one of the biggest things that's helped me. So I think, you talking to all these people and having all these conversations is so wonderful because we just learn from each other.
Yeah, well, thank you, Claire. Really appreciate that. And I also want to thank our sponsor, the Platinum Group, which for 40 years has helped companies during turbulent times. If your business needs help or would just appreciate a second opinion, you can call Platinum Group at 952-829-5700. And you can also learn more about Platinum Group at the website, theplatinumgrp.com. I also want to thank all of you for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time on One Take.
That actually brings me into, I would have said, right? I mean, we could have talked for hours about this, but yeah. I would have said that, leadership can really feel thankless sometimes, right? Because no one always really sees all the things that you're doing to keep stuff moving. But you have to find the good and the motivation in those little moments, right? And there's been so many of those along the way. The technician who suddenly pulls you aside and says, hey, how are you doing? Or thank you for that. And so that would have been a point. I could have brought that up when it's like, what didn't you ask me about? But I just wasn't thinking about it at the moment.
Well, maybe I'll splice that in at the end, saying this is unedited. However, at the end,
we have an extra.
Yeah, we'll do that little excerpt at the end.